Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'll be delivering the weekly report. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate are out of session this week for Thanksgiving and will return next week. Last week in the House came back on Monday and voted to pass two bills under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up a motion to table a censure resolution, that is, to kill the resolution, but they failed to pass it. On Tuesday, the House took up H.R. 4405, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and passed it under suspension of the rules by a vote of 427 to 1. Then the House took up and passed a rule governing floor consideration of 3 joint resolutions, 1 concurrent resolution, and 4 bills. Then began a minor bloodbath as the House turned to a number of censure resolutions. First, the House took up the measure it had failed to table the previous night, H.Res. 878, disapproving the behavior of Representative Chuy Garcia of Illinois, who announced his resignation from Congress shortly after his state's filing deadline on November 3rd. That is, after seeing to it that his chief of staff was the only candidate who had filed for the primary, thereby ensuring that only his chief of staff could replace him. The measure passed by a vote of 236 to 183, with 23 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the majority on a resolution that was offered by a Democrat. Then the House took up and failed to pass a motion to refer, that is, to kill, a resolution censuring Delegate Stacey Plaskett for conduct reflecting discreditably on the House of Representatives, for colluding with convicted felony sex offender Jeffrey Epstein during a congressional hearing. They were texting back and forth. The measure failed by a vote of 213 to 214 after 2 Republicans voted with the Democrats to kill it. Then the House took up and passed 3 Congressional Review Act resolutions of disapproval against Biden-era rules from the Bureau of Land Management. Then, having failed to refer the resolution censuring Delegate Stacey Plaskett, the House took it up and failed to pass it by a vote of 209 to 214, with 3 Republicans crossing party lines to vote against it, another 3 Republicans voting present, and 4 Republicans not voting at all. On Wednesday, the House took up and passed H.R. 5214, the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act, by a vote of 237 to 179. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 5107, the Clean D.C. Act, by a vote of 233 to 190. Then the House passed 2 bills under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up and passed a motion to refer, that is, to kill, a resolution censuring Representative Corey Mills. On Thursday, the House took up and passed H.R. 3109, the Refiner Act, and H.R. 1949, the Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act. On Friday, the House took up and passed H.Con. Res. 58, denouncing the horrors of socialism, by a vote of 285 to 98. Yes, you heard that right. A majority of the Democrats in the House of Representatives voted against a measure denouncing the horrors of socialism. That measure passed in the House at about 11 a.m., about 4 hours before President Trump was slated to meet in the Oval Office with Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic socialist who just got himself elected mayor of New York City. And then they were done. Last week in the Senate came back on Tuesday and moved by unanimous consent to pass H.R. 4055, the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Ho Nie to serve as a member of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to proceed to consideration of S.J. Res. 89, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval against a Biden-era rule from the Bureau of Land Management. Then the Senate failed to agree to a motion to proceed to consideration of S.J. Res. 76, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of a rule submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency. On Thursday, the Senate took up and passed H.J. Res. 130, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of a Biden-era rule submitted by the Bureau of Land Management. And then they were done. Now let's talk a bit about the Epstein Files. The House passed the bill by a vote of 427 to 1, and the Senate passed it that same afternoon by unanimous consent. So the only member of Congress to vote against it was Clay Higgins, Republican of Louisiana. He posted this to X by way of explanation. Quote, "I have been a principled no on this bill from the beginning. What was wrong with the bill 3 months ago is still wrong today. It abandons 250 years of criminal justice procedure in America. As written, this bill reveals and injures thousands of innocent people, witnesses, people who provided alibis, family members, etc. If enacted in its current form, this type of broad reveal of criminal investigation files released to a rabid media will absolutely result in innocent people being hurt. Not by my vote." End quote. Speaker Johnson was said to be spitting mad that Senate Majority Leader Thune moved to pass the bill through the Senate by unanimous consent. Johnson thought he had an understanding with Thune that the Senate would amend the bill to tighten it up so that those issues Congressman Higgins wrote about were addressed properly. Instead, Thune basically said that any bill that passes the House with 427 votes is going straight through the Senate and on to the president for his signature. So it did. President Trump signed the bill into law on Wednesday, triggering a 30-day review period to allow the Department of Justice to get the files ready for release. It is still unclear exactly what information is going to be released and when. The law specifically says the DOJ can hold back information in the files that is being used in another investigation. On the Friday before he signed the bill, Trump ordered the DOJ to launch a new investigation of Epstein's relationships with Bill Clinton and Larry Summers and other Democrats. So it'll be interesting to see if that's used by DOJ as an excuse for not releasing certain files. Stay tuned. Now, Democrat sedition? You remember how in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk just 2 months ago that people on all sides of the political debate seemed to agree that it would be a good idea to tone down the violent rhetoric? It didn't last very long. On Tuesday, a video recorded by 6 Democrats in the House and Senate went public. In the video, the 6, each of whom is a veteran either of the United States Armed Forces or the U.S. intelligence community, spoke directly to current U.S. troops, reminding them that they are not supposed to carry out illegal orders. Quote, "Our laws are clear," said Arizona Senator Mark Kelly in the video. "You can refuse illegal orders." Another Democrat, Congressman Chris DeLuzio of Pennsylvania, said, quote, "You must refuse illegal orders," end quote. None of the 6 specified any order President Trump had given as an illegal order. The video was organized by Senator Elisa Slotkin, Democrat of Michigan, herself a former CIA analyst who served in Iraq. It took President Trump 2 days to find that video, apparently, because on Thursday morning he raged on social media. "Seditious behavior," in all caps, "punishable by death," again, all caps, he wrote. Then he reposted someone else's comment, which read, in all caps, "Hang them, George Washington would," double exclamation point. First, there is actually no crime called sedition in the U.S. Code. What we have is seditious conspiracy, which occurs when 2 or more people agree to attempt, quote, "to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them," end quote. Seditious conspiracy also includes conspiring to, quote, "oppose by force the authority," unquote, "of the United States, or conspiring, quote, by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote. You'll note all three elements of that definition include the phrase by force. Making a video is not using force. It is speech. It is, in fact, protected speech, as is virtually all political speech. On the other hand, the video was terribly unwise, not least for the fact that it creates a false impression. Yes, service members are under no obligation to execute illegal orders. But who is to say what is an illegal order? Are service members supposed to question every order they get to determine on their own its legality? No, they're not. That's just not the way it works. A service member on trial for disobeying an order can question its legality, and then the lawyers will go to work. But keep this in mind. The courts have made clear their deference to the president in this area. Conservatives well remember the case of U.S. Army medical specialist Michael New, who refused an order from Bill Clinton to affix United Nations insignia to his uniform. At his court-martial, he argued that the order was unlawful because Clinton did not have the legal or constitutional authority to put American soldiers under the United Nations operational control. The court held otherwise. New was convicted. In a later proceeding, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia upheld that decision. Now to the latest on prosecuting Comey. It hasn't happened yet, but it sure looks like Judge Michael Nachmanoff, the judge in the case of the United States versus James Comey, is about to toss the case on procedural grounds, to wit, that bad lawyering by Lindsay Halligan, the interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, has invalidated the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, and the only appropriate remedy is to toss the case. At least, that's sure what it looked like during the hearing in his court last Wednesday. The question really is, will the judge throw out the case with prejudice, meaning Comey cannot be indicted later on the same charges? Stay tuned. Marjorie Taylor Greene announces she's done. On Friday evening, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Northwest Georgia announced that she would be resigning from the House of Representatives on January 5th, saying she refused to be a, quote, battered wife, unquote, following her falling out with President Trump when he called her a traitor and withdrew his endorsement and declared that somebody should primary her just a week ago. She put out a 4-page letter explaining her thinking. I doubt she will try to run for the United States Senate in Georgia against incumbent Democrat Jon Ossoff next year. There are already 3 high-profile Republicans running in that primary, but she could be interested in running for governor. The current count in the House is 219 Republicans and 214 Democrats with 3 vacancies. 213 Democrats with 3 vacancies. A Republican-held seat in Tennessee that will be filled shortly, a Democrat-held seat in Texas, and a Democrat-held seat in New Jersey, both of which will be filled early next year. Greene's resignation will drop the count of Republicans to 218 until presumably the Tennessee special election fills that seat with another Republican and brings the count back up to 219. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp will likely set the special election to fill the Greene seat vacancy in March. Stay tuned. Now to a redistricting recap. Remember when we first heard about the White House's desire to have red states engage in mid-decade redistricting? And I said it was dangerous to engage in overreach? I used the old axiom, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. Well, a hog just got slaughtered. In a remarkable 2-1 decision, a panel of federal judges in Texas last week ruled that Texas could not use its new congressional district map for next year's elections. Instead, the state will have to use the maps that were put in place by the legislature in 2021 and which were used for both the 2022 and 2024 House elections. If that ruling holds, the GOP will likely lose the 5 additional seats it thought it had gained when it remapped the state a few months ago. The amazing thing is the 160-page decision was written by a judge who was appointed by President Trump in his first term, and the stinging 104-page dissent was written by a judge appointed to the bench by Ronald Reagan. Here's the problem, as the court sees it. It sure looks like the state decided to engage in its rare mid-decade redistricting for racial reasons, not partisan. That is, the governor and the legislative leaders made clear they were responding to a letter from the Department of Justice that raised questions about the racial considerations that went into drawing the 2021 map. So when they responded by saying, in effect, no worry, we'll draw a new map, it looked like they were doing it for reasons of race. And that's not kosher. The Supreme Court says it has no problem with partisan gerrymandering. They look at a state like Illinois, where Democrats won 53% of the vote for U.S. House candidates, yet drew a map that yields 83% of the seats in the delegation, and the court says, nice job. But the court has a big problem with racial gerrymandering. That's a big no-no. It's unconstitutional, and it'll get a map thrown out every time. And that's what the 3-judge panel ruled the new Texas map is: an illegal, unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton immediately appealed, and on Friday, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who handles emergency applications from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, issued an administrative stay on the ruling, suspending that ruling. He then directed the respondents in the case, the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, to respond to Texas's appeal by close of business Monday, that is today, with a view to passing it on to the full Supreme Court. Texas's filing deadline for House seats is December 8th, so the court is going to have to act quickly. Now to the latest on Ukraine and Russia. 1 week ago Thursday, Axios broke a story about a new White House peace proposal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Drafted by White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev, the plan has 28 points, modeled on the 20-point Trump peace plan for Gaza. Dmitriev runs Russia's sovereign wealth fund, so it shouldn't surprise anyone to learn that Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner is also involved in the discussions. Witkoff and Dmitriev hashed out the plan over 3 days in Miami in late October. The peace plan is, to put it mildly, a capitulation. It is Washington's capitulation to Moscow and Trump's capitulation to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. And to succeed, it requires Ukraine's capitulation to Russia. The 28 points are incredibly lopsided, not surprising given who drafted it. There was no Ukrainian at the table, no European at the table when this proposal was put down on paper. Here are just some of the 28 points. Ukraine will be required to cede territory in the Donbas region of the country's east that it still controls, despite almost 4 years of Russia's most serious efforts to capture it. This is strategic territory, which is why both sides have fought so hard over it. Both sides know that if Russia were to gain control of this area, it could easily use this position as a launch pad for another lightning strike at Kyiv. The United States and other Western countries would officially recognize those areas of Ukraine as Russia. Ukraine's military would be reduced from almost 900,000, its current allotment, to no more than 600,000. New elections would be held in Ukraine within 100 days. Quote, NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine, end quote. Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. Quote, it is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further, end quote. Quote, a dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for the de-escalation in order to ensure global security and increase opportunities for cooperation and future economic development, end quote. Quote, Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees, unquote. Quote, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy, end quote. And, quote, Russia will be invited to rejoin the G8, unquote. Russia was expelled from the G8 in 2014 following its invasion of Crimea. These are just some of the 28 points. Needless to say, Ukraine and its allies point to some sticking points in this draft. For example, under the terms of this agreement, Ukraine would be required to cede territory Russia hasn't even won on the battlefield. And the particular territory in question is vitally strategic territory to boot. The plan requires Ukraine to hold new elections within 100 days, but says nothing about new elections in Russia. The plan purports to be a deal between Russia and Ukraine, but limits the activity of other countries. It requires, for example, that NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine. What does "it is expected" mean in the context of it is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries? And what is a reliable security guarantee that Ukraine will receive? From whom? What triggers it? Perhaps most worrisome for Ukraine and its allies is this point, quote, a dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States to resolve all security issues. The United States is a member of NATO. The United States is the rock on which the NATO alliance is built. It is not a neutral mediator. How can the U.S. mediate a dialogue between Russia and the U.S.? How can the U.S. mediate a dialogue between Russia and the U.S.'s NATO allies? This plan is Putin's wish list put on paper. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a phone call with a bipartisan group of senators on Saturday, said the plan was authored by the Russians. When the senators then began to spread the word and reporters heard and went back to the State Department for confirmation, Rubio and State said the plan was a U.S. plan. So let's keep a couple things in mind. First, Vladimir Putin has never kept a single promise he has ever made regarding Ukraine. He views Ukraine as a province of Russia that was illegally separated from Russia at the end of the Cold War, and he wants it back. Any agreement that relies in any way on trusting Putin's word on Ukraine is a fool's errand. Second, regarding so-called security guarantees for Ukraine, the only truly reliable security guarantees are NATO's Article 5 and a treaty ratified by the United States Senate. Anything less than one of those two conditions is just another Budapest Memorandum revisited. And we saw how well that worked out for the Ukrainians. Third, recognizing any part of Ukraine as officially Russian would set a new precedent. It would reward an aggressor for invading a sovereign nation and would punish a victim nation that was wrongfully invaded. The consequences for U.S. foreign and national security interests, not just in Europe, but around the world, would be enormous. Just think what Xi Jinping would think about taking Taiwan. President Trump declared in a radio interview on Thursday morning that he thought Ukraine's government should be able to decide whether it would agree to the terms by Thanksgiving Day, 1 week. Rubio and Witkoff and Kushner met with senior Ukrainian government officials in Geneva on Saturday and Sunday and said they made progress. I don't know what kind of progress they could be talking about. Ukraine cannot agree to these terms. Zelensky's government would fall if he were to accept this capitulation. Stay tuned. That's our Washington report for this week. We will not be back next week, so we can have the same happy Thanksgiving we wish to you. Until we see you again, be well and be active.